I've got one for you. Got mad at me because I woke him up after he headbutted me in my sleep. Then got so upset, he proceeded to choke me out on the floor while I screamed at the top of my lungs. Thank God I was at my mom's. My mom calls the police, and afterwards, as he's packing his things, he says that we're crazy bitches and walks out the door. And to think I stayed with him after that.
Let's find somebody to blame. Who's responsible for this toxic relationship? Is it the boyfriend for being violent? Is it the girlfriend for choosing to be with a man like this and then going back to him even after this incident? Is it her mother for not raising her to value herself more? Or is it the boyfriend's mother for not raising her son right? Is it our culture to blame? Is it our biology? Or is free will an illusion and nobody is to blame? I'm not sure exactly who is responsible for awful situations like this, but I am certain who isn't to blame. You. If you're dating a girl like this one and she has been mistreated and abused in the past, a boyfriend who cheated on her, lied to her, abused her, that isn't your fault. This is a video for men who have dated or are dating women who have trust issues, who make you feel responsible for what other men have done to them. She might say something like, well, of course I go through your phone. You know that my ex cheated on me. I don't trust men. Or, don't you ever show the emotion of anger to me. My boyfriend used to hit me when he was angry. Or, I know that you've never lied to me, but I still don't trust you because other men have lied to me my whole life. These kinds of situations confuse men because most men, they don't know how to balance the compassion that they feel for their girlfriend's past suffering with their own rights, right? It can sometimes feel as though asserting your own rights as an individual is somehow being cruel or insensitive to what your partner has been through. Like in the video that we just watched, if you were dating that girl and she told you that story, obviously your response would be compassion. Like, we don't know the surrounding details of the relationship, but, getting choked by your boyfriend, screaming at the top of your lungs, your mum having to call the police, that's going to be a really traumatic experience. If you were dating this girl and she told you this story, most men would be horrified. Your masculine instincts would kick in, for compassion. You'd want to comfort her. You'd want to protect her. But what if her trauma runs so deep that every time you have an argument, her trauma gets triggered and she starts yelling and freaking out? What if it's just a normal disagreement that any couple would have, but the slightest sign that you're getting frustrated with her, even if that frustration is totally justified because of how she's acting, even so, she loses her mind? Well then, what are you meant to do? To tell her that she is overreacting and that she's being irrational seems cruel because you know that it's her trauma that has been triggered and you're sensitive to that. But on the other hand, if you're being a rational, respectful person who's just having a normal response of being upset during a disagreement or frustrated at some of her behaviors, but she acts as though you are some kind of abusive monster, by saying nothing, by not objecting to the premise that she has set, you are acting as though her response is reasonable to the present circumstances. And in so doing, you are betraying yourself. You are accepting her treatment of you when her response to you is actually about her own unresolved trauma. The actions of her ex-boyfriend, they have nothing to do with you. It's what's called codependence, when you take responsibility for another person's emotions. If you act as though her treatment of you is appropriate, then you are being codependent with her, and that's not good for her or for you. Codependence is poison to a relationship. You can't take responsibility for another person's emotions. You can't allow your girlfriend to blame you for the emotions she's feeling when you're not actually the cause of those emotions. Her ex-boyfriend is. She has the right to expect compassion from you. What she went through is messed up, so you should validate her emotions. If she says, this conversation is hard for me because I'm still so shaken by what my ex did for me, that's why I'm so emotional, then be there for her, comfort her. Absolutely, she deserves your sympathy because she is taking responsibility for her own emotional reaction. She's not blaming you, okay? Because you have rights too. Don't forget that, okay? Rights in a relationship don't just belong to women, they belong to men too. So you have rights in a relationship. So while she is right to expect compassion and understanding from you, you have a right to begin the relationship as a blank slate and only be held responsible for your actions, for your words, not some other man's. I so strongly dislike movements that try and make individuals responsible for the actions of the group, like the extreme branch of feminism that holds individual men responsible for every asshole guy out there just because he's a man, even if as an individual, he's never done anything wrong. So if your girlfriend has had issues with men before she met you and her unresolved emotions keep getting pushed on to you and she keeps blaming you, even though it's obvious that her reaction is deeply informed by her past experiences, you have to put your foot down. You can't tolerate that. Trust me. You're not helping yourself or her by being codependent. You cannot allow your masculine compassion for the suffering that she has been through to allow you to disregard reality and your own individual rights. Nothing good can come from that. It all comes from this fundamental misunderstanding of her own emotions. What is the cause and what is the trigger? If you're upset with her at a normal level during a regular couple disagreement and she freaks out, while it is accurate to say that you have triggered her emotional response, you haven't caused it. Her unresolved trauma from her ex-boyfriend is the true cause of her emotions. If she'd never had that awful experience of abuse, then her reaction to you in this regular disagreement would be a lot more level-headed. Now, I don't think that it's fair to say that women who don't understand the difference between a cause and a trigger is necessarily low quality, because when you've been traumatized and abused, your emotional awareness is compromised in a very real way. Lots of men out there can probably relate to this because, trauma doesn't just happen to women. So while I'm not saying that she's automatically a low quality woman because of her trauma, that doesn't make sense. Women who are abused in relationships or abused as children, it's hardly their fault, okay? But they often do have difficulty with this emotional stuff. And the hard truth is that they just might not be ready for a real romantic relationship yet. It's just too messy. The relationship they really need is one with a therapist where they can play out their issues in a safe environment, where the therapist is there for them 100% to meet their needs, to help them get to the root of their trauma and to help them overcome it. Once they've done that, then they're ready for a romantic relationship. But before then, frankly, it can just get really, really messy and complicated because, and this is the part that so few men understand, it's not just an accident, you see, that she keeps making you responsible for her emotions. On one level, it is intentional what she's doing. Okay, so let's unpack this. How the mind works psychologically. I really find this stuff quite fascinating. You see, what the mind is trying to do in its attempt to overcome trauma, we are, as human beings, unconsciously driven to reenact traumatic scenarios that we've lived through in order to give us a chance to respond better the next time around and then heal. So if you want to know why men date men just like their abusive fathers, you want to know why the woman in the video clip that we watched at the start of this video went back to her boyfriend even after he, choked her out. This is the reason. This is what's going on. The mind pushes you into danger again and again and again with the hopes that this time you can respond differently and then feel stronger, feel empowered, and therefore overcome your trauma. But the problem is, we have these limitations. The human mind is so desperate to do this, to overcome trauma, that when we can't find an actual equivalent situation in reality, the mind will use delusion and fantasy to recreate the situation and then try and use that delusion to try and heal. So what I mean is that even though you might not be her ex-boyfriend, you're a different type of man, you're a nice guy, she might react to you as though you are abusive, just like her ex is. And she will pretend that that's what's actually going on in reality so that she can have a do-over. But this time it's different. This time she stands up for herself and she asserts her rights against the horrible, abusive man. She's basically using you as a prop for her own psychological healing. And I mean, when you understand that's her motive, it makes sense why it suits her to cast you in the role of the villain so that she can play the hero. But you can't let that happen. It's not fair to you. It's unhealthy. It's a distortion of reality. I'm not saying that the psychological technique itself is bad. In fact, it's, tremendously powerful. It's what happens in therapy. You play out your traumas in that relationship, projection, transference, and that can be extraordinarily healing. So that's good because it's with a therapist, but it's inappropriate in a romantic relationship because it's not real. It's not true to who you actually are. It's not the role that you were meant to play as her romantic partner. So you can't tolerate it. If your girlfriend has been traumatized, but she refuses to seek therapy and she continues to invite you to be codependent with her, then I'm sorry to say this, but you may have to pause the relationship because she's not ready. She needs to overcome her trauma first, at least to a certain level of healing, to a certain level of self-awareness, so that then you can support her, in her journey, in her growth, without her needing to project all of that onto you. So men, please do not take responsibility for the actions of other men. I promise you, no good can come from it. Recently, I ran a poll on my YouTube page asking men if they would rather date a lawyer or a waitress, and 77% of men answered waitress. Now, obviously, some of that's just going to be that they don't like the idea of dating an argumentative career lawyer type woman, but there's no denying that waitresses can hold a certain appeal, and some men can get really infatuated, huge crushes on waitresses. Why? What is it about this particular social role that seems to have such a hold on men? This is the topic of my latest Patreon video. If you've ever had a crush on a waitress, I highly recommend you check out this video. You might find it a bit confronting, but I think the information is really good. You want to see that video? Please go and sign up on my Patreon. It's just a $5 a month subscription, really good value. You get instant access to that video, plus my entire back catalog of exclusive videos. Must be like 170, 180 videos at this point. I post twice weekly. Great discussions, great community. I'd love to see you over there so you can be a part of it.